Did you know that there's bodies buried under the streets in San Francisco? I kid you not. Did you know that in 1901, San Francisco banned burials in the city? There's only 2 places where you'll find cemeteries. And did you know that they exhumed the bodies and took them out to Colma and put many of them in mass graves, and then reused the headstones for city projects, some of which you can see today with parts of their epitaphs available for you to look at. This is a crazy story. And FYI, the story goes back even further than 1901. Moving bodies has been a thing in San Francisco for a long time. I'm Aimee Cross, and I cannot wait to tell you more about this story because it's crazy. I do have a little booklet that I've created where I go into even more detail than I'll be able to today, along with a lot of really cool photographs. And that is available in 2 ways. You can either get it on my Etsy page, and there will be a QR code and a link to that at the end of this video. Or you can join Aimee's crew, where you get an opportunity to get the handout of the month. So this will be available in January and February of 2026 for Aimee's crew. And Aimee's crew members also get the opportunity to do a live stream with me once a month where I work on building family trees and discovering family history. And you can ask questions along the way, so it's kind of cool. So this book is really kind of cool. I've spent a lot of time working on it, and I've really enjoyed studying and learning more about the craziness of burials in San Francisco. Oh, and I almost forgot. In that booklet, in that handout, is also detailed information on how to find many of the people that were buried in San Francisco. So if you have ancestors that were buried in San Francisco, you actually may still be able to find information about them. And a lot of people don't know about that. So the reason I got into this is because my great-great-grandfather, Pierre Bernard Dumont, was buried in one of the cemeteries and then moved to another location. Here's a picture of Pierre with his wife Estelle and their 4 children. So San Francisco was established in 1776 as a mission and as a small presidio. And so it was small forever until the gold rush. And one of the only 2 burial yards that are still there in San Francisco is part of the mission. However, the mission has been encroached upon. The original property of the mission is now streets and other buildings. And while they did exhume some of those bodies and transfer them to another location, at that time, another burial yard, some of them didn't get moved. And when projects are being done around the city, bodies are found on a regular basis, even today. So in 1848, right before the gold rush of 1849, there were 1,000 people in San Francisco. In 1 year, 10,000 people arrived in San Francisco. Now you can imagine conditions under those circumstances would not be terrific. A lot of people died, and some people were even very ill or had passed away on ships when they arrived in San Francisco. And in this image, you can see how full the harbor was during this time. Now, at the time of the gold rush, the only cemetery that was open was the Mission Dolores. And that church burial ground still exists, but you had to be Catholic to be buried there. And a lot of the 49ers were not. And so what do you do with these people that are buried? Well, for a long time, people were just kind of buried wherever, maybe in a yard or maybe over here, kind of out of town. And what kept happening is they kept making graveyards in places that seemed to be at the time far out of town, but they didn't stay that way. As the town expanded, people were like, we got to move this burial ground. So even before the 1901 situation where the city stopped all burials, they still had a problem with closing down cemeteries, moving the bodies from those cemeteries, and then eventually moving them again because of that change that happened in the 1900s. Now, here is a map of some of the older cemeteries in San Francisco. And the first official cemetery was the Yerba Buena Cemetery. But prior to that, people were being buried at North Beach Burial Grounds and at the Sailors Burial Ground. And then another group of sailors were buried in the Russian cemetery because this was a Russian ship and many of them got ill. But that was at the top of a hill. And so it didn't last long. So those three places, North Beach, Sailors Burial Cemetery, and Russian Cemetery, a lot of those people ended up getting moved. Some of them to Yerba Buena, and then some of them at a later date to other cemeteries. Now, the other cemetery that was around long before the 49ers was the Presidio Cemetery, because that's where the military base is. And so that cemetery was used for soldiers who were serving in the war. And that became a national cemetery in 1884. By 2009, there are over 2,800 veterans and their family members buried in the cemetery, but the cemetery is no longer taking interments. So let's talk about what happened in the meantime, right? So we have this city cemetery, the Yerba Buena Cemetery. But if you look at where it's located, it's right in the middle of San Francisco today. And so they ended up doing another cemetery, the city cemetery. Now, the city cemetery opened in 1870, and it was a municipal burial ground, and anybody could be buried there. And as of about 1893, there were about 18,000 people that were interned there. But today, seriously, it's the Lincoln Park Golf Course and the Legion of Honor. And when they've done work on the Legion of Honor, they have found bodies. And it was reported that there were so many of them that the construction workers just didn't even want to touch them in the early 1900s when they first came across them. It's crazy, but it gets better. So the city identified that we've got a big problem here. We've got people expanding and we need to find another cemetery. So they moved out to Lone Mountain and they purchased a bunch of property in Lone Mountain. And in the 1870s, 1880s, multiple different cemeteries opened up. And that includes Oddfellow Cemetery, the Masonic Cemetery, Calvary Cemetery, and Laurel Hill Cemetery. And you can see that they're all kind of within a close geographical area of one another. Well, when the 1901 ruling happened and they could no longer accept burials, these cemeteries didn't have perpetuation funds. And so they had no money to take care of the cemeteries. And what were at one point a really nice cemeteries ended up getting really run down and really gross. And the people were very concerned about this situation, these dead bodies, some of them because of the sand kind of coming up. It was like crazy people. And so they just complained, as anybody would, right? And at that time too, they just discovered germs, right? So they were worried about the germs that could be happening. They were worried about their water and the quality of their water. And so there was some legitimate concerns. Plus, as had happened in the past, San Francisco had been expanding, and now that area around the cemeteries was populated. And so it wasn't way out in the boonies like it had originally been. So in 1914, cemeteries started getting eviction notices telling that they needed to remove their bodies and relocate them. And there were a lot of court battles. But the final battles ended in 1937, and the remaining bodies were moved between 1937 and the early 1940s. And they were moved, for the most part, to Colma. And if you don't know where Colma is, it's just south of San Francisco on the peninsula. And Colma had a really important role in the gold rush days because that's where they grew the food to feed all of the gold rushers that were storming the city. But now Colma has a population of one person living to 1,000 burials. Yes, I kid you not. Now, the mass grave at the cemetery that took the Oddfellows occupants, which is Green Lawn Cemetery in Colma, is even crazier because they put up a marker there, but it's been broken off and it's now in the middle of basically dirt vacant lot between right now a Best Buy and a Home Depot. I saw a picture of it on Instagram, but I can't put that up there for you to see for copyright purposes. So if somebody can get me a picture of that marker as well, I would really appreciate it. So it makes me kind of sad that some of these remains of people that had lived had once been buried in San Francisco have kind of not been treated with a lot of respect. Now, that great grandfather that I was telling you about was relocated to Colma, and here's a picture of the family marker that we have there that has a number of those family members now there. So what happened? How did these things get moved? And how did the city use their headstones? This is where it gets kind of crazy. All right. So different cemeteries, they were all responsible for handling it themselves. They would reach out to the family members if they could locate them of those that were deceased and asked if they wanted to move the bodies. Now, in some instances, the moving of the body was free, but the moving of the headstone was not. And that was expensive because they were heavy. And so many times people did not move the headstones. In other instances, from what I've read, sometimes the moving of the headstone was free, but the moving of the body wasn't. And so people opted to just not even deal with it. So not very many family members did take their own family and relocate them to a different location. They were just moved by the city. And when they dug up these interments, when they dug up these caskets and graves, they missed people. And they're still there. As a matter of fact, in the area of the Oddfellows cemeteries, in that grouping of cemeteries, in a reconstruction project that a family was doing on their house, they uncovered a perfectly intact casket of a little girl. And so it's nuts. This is crazy, people. But it gets even better because they had to move so many bodies. Maybe I shouldn't say that. Does it get even better? To me, crazy stories are interesting. But I don't know that it's better, I'll be honest with you. I actually have mixed feelings about this because what I'm going to get into next is the headstones and the other monuments. Because the city ended up putting a lot of these headstones and monuments, they were given to the city, and they've used them in construction projects. And it's crazy. Here are some examples. So the first is the easiest to view. It's Buena Vista Park. Still there. These are photographs that I took just within the last year. And you can see they use the headstones for their drainage ditches that run along their cement pathways. And some of them, you can see part of the epitaph. It's kind of creepy. And this is where I really struggle. These families sacrificed to put up a headstone for their ancestors and, for their husbands, wives, children, good friends. And they were just destroyed. They were just treated so disrespectfully. And that kind of bothers me. And then there's another part of me that's like, well, at least we're recycling and flat materials make great drainage ditches. But I don't know. I'm really torn. What do you think? Put it in the comments. I would love to hear what you think. Now, another big portion of these monuments and headstones were used to build the aquatic park seawall in 1939. The military had built a seawall in 1911, and they had created a new seawall, but they needed to kind of plug the gap between the two, and that's where they used the headstones. And at low tide, sometimes you can still see them. And then finally, and this wasn't that long ago, the wave organ was created by artist Peter Richard and stonemason George Gonzalez in 1986. It wasn't that long ago, people. And here's a picture of it that I took. And what this is they've taken like PVC pipe at different places in the tide. So as the tide comes in and as the waves break, they come up into the PVC pipes and they make noise. And it's kind of really interesting to hear. FYI, if you want to go check it out, you can hear it best at high tide. And you can see in this picture where there's some of these tubes coming out, that's where you can hear the sounds coming up. But there's also benches where you can sit down. And if you take a look at some of these things, you'll notice that they do come from monuments of burials. This trash can is one of the most interesting to me. Isn't that obvious? A monument for a burial that's around it? It's crazy. Now, if you want to visit the locations of some of these, all of the details are in that little booklet. But let me just give you a quick rundown of a few of them. Now, North Beach, one of the original cemeteries, not the official one, but kind of where people were burying people, is now Saints Peter and Paul Church. Yerba Buena opened on the west edge of town. They stopped accepting burials in 1858, And by about 1868, their numbers were close to 9,000. But the burials were removed to the city cemetery, and they built the old city hall there that was destroyed in the 1906 earthquake. And they encountered more bodies when they built the old city hall. That area is now the United Nations Plaza. Now, near the Lincoln Park Golf Course, where the city cemetery was, there are two remaining monuments. The Lady Seamen's Freeman Society's monument that was built in 1880, and this King Chow funerary structure that's in Lincoln Park. This was part of the Chinese area of that burial ground. I didn't take a picture when I was there of the Lady Seaman Friends Society's monument. And so if somebody wants to take a picture and send it to me, I would love that. Thank you so much. Now, in honor of their customs, the Chinese, when these bodies were exhumed, sent them back to their homeland to be buried with their families. But most of the other bodies ended up in mass graves in various cemeteries in Colma. Now, Calvary Cemetery, the Catholic cemetery there in that one area where we have all of the cemeteries together that were the last group of cemeteries, they were probably the most careful in removing their bodies, according to newspaper articles and the research that I did. But they still have a section called the Calvary Mound in the Holy Cross Cemetery of Colma, and that's basically a mass grave. Moving these graves was not cheap. The Laurel Hill Cemetery was one of the last cemeteries to comply with the order to remove those that were interred. And so in the late 1930s, early 1940s, they did so, but it cost them an estimated over $121,000 to remove the graves, and then more than $200,000 to relocate them, to purchase the land and relocate them in Colma. They ended up selling the property in order to try to offset their costs. But here's a picture of what it looked like as things were deteriorating. You can see that what was once a beautiful cemetery became an eyesore. Now, besides the Mission Burial Ground in San Francisco, where there are still about 250 interred, and the Presidio Cemetery, there is also a columbarium, which is a place with a bunch of niches in order for cremated remains to be kept. It was neglected for many years, but has been beautifully restored. And I highly recommend that you go and visit it. It's now being run by the Neptune Society, and it's a gorgeous building. Here are some pictures that I took when I was there just last summer. Within the booklet that I created, I have the story of the burial of Thomas Wood. I got it from a newspaper article, and then I did some additional research on him. He served in the military for over 30 years, and when he died, he was penniless. And he ended up being buried in the pauper's grave. And this article describes kind of what the conditions were and what that was like, and I have all of that in the booklet. Now, the other thing that I have in the booklet is how do you find people if you know that your family members were interred in San Francisco or may have died there? And this is really important to me because I want you to be able to find the records. And they're not going to show up in a website like Find a Grave in most instances because they don't have a gravesite anymore. So this is where you can go. And in the booklet, I have step-by-step instructions and an evaluation of some of the different record groups that are available to you, as well as some examples. I'll show you a couple, but there's a little bit more there. Now, you can go to FamilySearch, and you want to search the catalog by location by San Francisco. And there you'll find information on cemeteries. And there you can find some of the original burial information, and then in other instances, information on when they were moved and relocated to a different place. It was there that I found the records on my family, the Dumonts. The Calvary and Holy Cross Cemetery registers are held in a different location, and the San Francisco Genealogy website has those. I really had a great time researching this. It was so interesting, and all of the different sites where I visited are listed in the booklet as well, but I particularly like to pay attention to Beth Weingarner's book, San Francisco's Forgotten Cemeteries, A Buried History, which is still available on Amazon. I hope you found this as fascinating as I have, and if you do have people that were in San Francisco during this time period and may have died, I hope that you can find more information about them. Here's the link to my Etsy page where you can get the booklet, as well as this video, A Guide to FamilySearch. FamilySearch is a fantastic website and it's free. And this will tell you more about the catalog and some of the other things that you can find on FamilySearch to help you learn more about your ancestors. I hope you have a great day.